Good morning slash afternoon. Actually, it's afternoon now for everybody. Thank you very much for coming. This is another month's allotment of webinar. Thank you very much for joining. Last month we did the data trends for 2024. And this is the next step on that one. This is going more into the governance side of things and data privacy side. We do cover some of the trends in these particular spaces in this session. And we talk a little bit about what that means, the context of data governance, data privacy for your organization in this session. We do have other webinars, but I like doing this monthly webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about some of the shifts in the market, what that means to the trends in data privacy, then sort of the changes that we've been seeing in data governance across the board and what that means for your organization. There'll be some times for questions at the end. Put those into the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll get to those at the end if there are any. As Samantha Swain likes to make me do, I've got to introduce myself for those that don't know me. I'm Alex. I've been here for a number of years at Altus. I've been consulting across Australasia, the USA, etc. And I love doing these things. I love being a thought leader in the space. These webinars allow me to take the time to think about what's happening out there and tell the stories of what we're seeing with our customers, helping shape what's happening in the market. It's an important thing that I'm very proud to be able to be part of. So this particular slide has some elements that we talked about last month. There have been some changes in the market, and some of these have been really impactful on data privacy and data governance. During the pandemic years, and it's been a lot of time moving data up into those platforms, allowing you to have then a lot of data then to do advanced analytics, as well as your descriptive and your discovery reporting across as well. Changes have happened in the market to mean that a lot of organizations are now looking to get outcomes from that data rather than spending time building more data into the platform. It's really around getting the outcomes from that. In terms of ChatGPT, last year there was a massive change towards what generative AI is, and has brought a lot of conversation to people's mind. We're seeing a lot of that in the context of data privacy, which we'll talk about soon, and the governance around ChatGPT and generative AI. And then what we've also seen is in the last year especially, a lot of the vendors out there with their solutions that they've had have really taken a focus to also include data governance in their solutions and try and build on that as well. Really, they're trying to make sure that they have quite a few bases covered in their offering and be more holistic rather than necessarily a data movement tool. So in terms of data governance, one of the key things about data governance is that it's quite interesting to talk to different people and see what they think data governance is. There's an interesting concept of data governance, which is that some people sort of break it down into smaller chunks of it, building some components and controls around things, around data, and building some data inventory side of things, and sort of making sure everything's documented at some level of it, and making sure we've got some people in certain places. But a lot of it's more in that sort of context is around having the policies and processes high level dictated and documented, and that's sort of more of a governmentary, regulatory sort of bent on things. What we see really is data governance is also has to be considered in that holistic, broad scope. Data governance includes everything from data security and data privacy through to data quality and how your data is architected and things like that, and where data is captured and the lineage of things. there is a broad set of things. A lot of what we find is that organizations spend a lot of time thinking of data governance in a narrower context, maybe on data lineage, maybe about having some data stewards in place, and don't necessarily see how these things operate fully together and make sure that they're all working as one, which is where you get good data governance. What we found, and I'm sort of finding with a lot of the tools out there that are expanding on their data governance capabilities, that a lot of them are focusing on some distinct aspects in here. We're seeing some of them particularly going, look, let's build our data lineage capabilities and having some of that and being able to showcase the metadata around that data. They're doing a lot of work around that, but not as many doing some work around data quality in terms of their tools and being able to bring that out, etc. So when you hear a tooling vendor showcase that they're bringing good data governance controls into their tools, you've got to be mindful of what particular areas that they actually mean by that. Take a broader context, make sure you cover all of these things with them, and go through a checklist of what does it and does it not do. So you've got that information there and captured that so you can see what that scope of that tool is. Where it doesn't play a part, you still need to find some ways of practically rolling something out for your organization. And that's important because what we've seen in an organizations historically was that when we looked at an organization, we helped them with data governance. One of the things we were focusing on was less so the tooling side, but more the people side of things. Who is going to be your data? Who are the data owners? Who are the data stewards? And one of the problems we've had in the past is some of the people who are historically data owners have been people who have been pretty busy. In my example here, made up example, our head of customer experience is a person named Sarah. And her job, and this is an important job these days, more and more so, organizations are bringing customer experience heads of together, a general manager, GM of customer experience type roles. And they're focused on making sure that your customers are very sticky with you and bringing in new lines of customers and making sure that you're on the forefront of offering that customer experience that makes them want to come back and spend more money with you. To do that, she in this case needs data that's very well governed and got good control over it, so she can get the team to do advanced analytics and try and be predictive about where new customers are and trends. Do more discovery reporting about why things have happened, why maybe there was a downturn there, where's the opportunity in the future, and then maybe be able to innovate with new tools and offerings to the market that's going to be really targeted to their types of customers. What's really going to be good for the customer out there? Not what do we think is going to be good and give us most money, but what's going to be good for the customer so that they'll spend their money. Historically, someone like Sarah would be targeted as a data owner, someone to make those decisions around data governance. But unfortunately, what happens is Sarah is enormously busy. She's always would be in that type of role, always in meetings, always having to either be in meetings about the customer experience or having to be a bit reactive when customers have some issues and seeing if there's some problems there underlying, always busy. So then to bring data governance into a bucket and say, you've got to now control this data governance for the customer side of things is often too much. We've seen that too much for organizations. And so rolling that back and practically giving tools to Sarah in a way that she can be able to pass on some of those responsibilities to certain people, be able to control things where she needs to, and it needs to have a say, but giving it to her a way that it allows her to be easily able to make decisions is so important today and in the trends of 2024. In terms of practical data governance, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations put together their terms of reference or their data principles. That will be around solid foundations. What do we need to have in place to make sure we're doing a good job? What are our opportunities? How do we make this thing sticky for our organization? What are the challenges we're trying to overcome and stuff? This would have been put together several years ago. And what we're finding is a lot of organizations now need to relook at their data principles, their terms of reference for going about their capabilities and doing the governance around this. Leads to the governance. All these pieces around governance need to be relooked at in 2024. This is a year when organizations are relooking at this. What are our foundations to make sure that we have considered Gen AI in the mix, or broken down advanced analytics into more granular pieces, or looking at data privacy in this new world and how we're going to make sure that we're covered. So making sure the foundations are important, up to date, make sure the opportunities are there. Opportunities need to be supportive of someone like Sarah to make sure that these are indicative of making sure the opportunities are around growth of your customers, for example. And then making sure that your KPIs, to make sure that you're measuring against it, are reset. So it might not be that you are, as you over the last few years have been looking at the number of things in your data store, but making sure that it's used and you're actually using that in better ways is now maybe the focus of the change, and maybe where you need to spend more time on your KPIs over the next 12 to 24 months. As well as that, it's a lot of organizations are spending time now looking at their portal. Several years ago, it may have been important to put stuff like Power BI training videos up there so that people could log on, they could look at some videos on how to use Power BI, then get their hands on the tool and start to use it in a reasonable way. Now, a few years later, that concept still might be important to have there, but it might be important to enhance it with some of the more advanced modeling the stuff within Power BI. Maybe some focus sometimes around some stuff around understanding advanced analytics and generative AI type things. Information about privacy of data and how to use that, and PII data, all should go into the portal and have this as not just a place for them to start their skills and their upskilling in data, but actually to help them support their journey with data. In terms of the trends for 2024, I went to 2 different places to look at the trends. One of them is a bit more high level, this one here from Forbes. In their space, what it's around, where they see the trends of 2024 being is around continued enforcement of the privacy regulations. In Europe, what we've seen is a large number of organizations actually being penalized for breaches around the GDPR stuff. Some of the hardest regulations in that space and around the world is in Europe. And a lot more violations were made and a lot more penalties were put on organizations last year compared to the 3 years prior. The 3 years prior was all about making sure organizations put in controls in there and really making sure they had time to make sure they had the framework in place to support that. And then last year, and now especially this year and next year, it's going to be around making sure those are enforced by penalising companies that haven't lived up to it. You've seen that across Australia as well, where organisations like Optus, where they had privacy breaches, etc., really got heavily penalised last year, and that's going to continue on. Where previous years they've allowed them to get up the time to be able to put up the controls in place. Now it's really about enforcement. There is an increase on children's privacy and making sure things like Gen AI and social media things are actually, where did that information come from? Is it actually from sources that may be children and you're actually inputting that stuff? You've got to be careful in that space. But an important one is around this AI policy and governance. The controls that you had a few years ago around privacy and around the governance around your data is one thing, but now it's changed with advanced analytics and AI and having specific policies and processes in place for those advanced analytics types is really important, and making sure you understand when and where you can use these things and how much can you rely on them. And then a lot of organizations are rethinking the business model and privacy to take advantage of some of these, and making sure you've got your processes in place to make sure you're considering privacy in the right way. And then it's around making sure that you understand that consumers, your customers, really understand privacy of their data in more complex ways now than they did a couple of years ago. They are more willing to spend time finding suppliers and places that they're working with that do take the time to consider data privacy as part of their way they do business. In terms of Gartner, their trends were really around data localization. What was happening a lot over the last several years was organizations were spending quite a bit of time bringing data sets together from different regions and allowing you to have that in perhaps centralized spots. Now what's happening is, because rules about privacy and making sure there's sovereignty around data exist, organizations have to have certain data local so that they can enforce the rules and policies around those things. So there's more context around actually spreading out data in certain ways to be in localized environments. And so you need to architect around in those particular ways. There's also some privacy enhancing techniques that allow you to actually have controlling tools that support you understanding how you're using data in certain ways. And they also have that context around making sure your AI governance is considered separate from just your standard data governance that you may have had before. Also, remote is becoming even more important. Everyone is working further, in more, almost everybody has some level of ability to work remotely now, all the time, some of the time, occasionally. And so making sure that everything is considered within that, especially in context of the data localization and the data privacy, and making sure you're still able to support people working hybridly, but making sure that the data is private is really paramount. So in terms of using data in your organization, with your own people and customers, one key consideration is actually how people perceive data and privacy and governance, etc. What's really important is that there was historically a viewpoint that people are pretty liberal around data, that you get information and people were pretty happy with how that was being used or the context around it. There were less questions around it. With social media, with some of the generative AI stuff over the last year, people especially, people and the AI in general, people are more concerned around how things are stored, how things are used, what information is being used, how did they get that information, etc. So actually, people who are really open to it actually makes up about 13% of your internal and customer base. More than half of them are actually going to be anxious or concerned about where that data is and how it's being used. And so you need to consider that in the way that you're using data, the way you're innovating and presenting it to your customers and internally in conversations, because you need to actually take them along that journey in the right way to make sure that you are actually supporting the concerned people and giving them the information that allows them to feel that they've got the right consent or that there are the right controls in place for you to be doing things the right way. In terms of generative AI, we've put together a bit of a framework. What we're seeing is a lot of organizations really wanting to consider starting to use AI. What we see in organizations is there's a compacting amount of resource that organizations have. They're cutting costs in many cases to try and support broader sets of actions. The scale is often something that is of an issue. And so Gen AI can really help in that scale piece. It allows you to go, instead of spending a lot of time investigating how to do something, I could just use Gen AI to generate the answers and use that as part of the context of my business process. That sounds great. It allows you to conceptually scale things and use information available out there by using the right tools. The problem comes from when you ask questions about it. Where did those answers come from? Can you trust them? Should we have used those answers instead of actually spending our time generating it? Was there another way we could have got those answers? Are we just doing this for the fun of it? You know, we wanted to get on the trend and make sure we can stay we're using Gen AI, but are we actually doing it because it's the right reason for doing it? We came through with a framework. This framework is for your internal use of generative AI. Should you use it and how can you use it? In this case, this framework is an important step in making sure that you've considered Gen AI in your business processes that you're trying to deliver. Starts with identifying your business processes that may want to use generative AI to supplement that business process. Going through identifying with the business where those are, logging them into a system so that you've got a backlog of potential uses for Gen AI where those are. That would, of course, start with some education around what Gen AI is, Gen AI and other advanced analytics are, and how you could use them. Then it's around assessing the business process, looking at each of them, saying, you know, is the information we're going to get from this important? Is it the right process to do with Gen AI? Do we actually have the skills in-house to already do it without Gen AI? Are we just doing it for the fun, or do we actually have a scale problem here that would be solved by generative AI? Then it's about the review, looking at what generative AI actually produced and seeing if that's appropriate for the type of business process you have. That's not necessarily a given, but you want to go through and make sure that it is. And then you want to be able to prioritize that against the other particular things that you've identified, and then prioritize it against the actual outcomes that you got from generative AI to say, okay, how much better is this than the stuff we were able to manually do ourselves, and prioritize that gap to see where you should focus your time on that. Once you've done that, it's around preparing that data that's been produced from AI, being able to store it somewhere so that you're able to then actually use it in a way where it's traceable, where people can refer back to it and say, this is what it was and this is how we used it. Be able to then go through and say, actually, it's changed over time, etc. That then goes through to releasing it and maintaining it, being able to put it out to your business and say, this is now available, you can use this output, and making sure that it's updated when it needs to be. And then to be able to measure and report it. How often are we using generative AI in our business processes? How successful was it? How much time did it reduce in us being able to having to do that manually? Where were the values given and generated for us? And across each of those, we have governance stuff. Do we have the data stewards, people like Sarah in place to say we are using generative AI in these particular spaces to give more success to our customers, etc.? Do we have the subject matter experts in place to make sure that they are really able to help do this assessment and review in the right and appropriate manner, to make sure that they are practical and appropriately assessing this and not just doing it for the fun of it? And then do we have our data custodians and other managers to be able to have the context of knowing when they can use that information and in the right way to be able to do that? So all of that governance needs to be applied across this framework. And this framework has a series of particular outputs that happen along that way that help support you using generative AI. If you want to use this framework, let us know and we can help work through this within your own organization. All right, so that's it for the presentation. Let me see if there are any questions. No questions, Q&A or chat questions coming in. Just a moment, and you've put it in here if you have a moment. I do want to thank you so much for your time today. I do enjoy this topic. I hope you enjoy these monthly webinars that I put out. We do have an upcoming months laid out. That's up on our website under the webinar, what we do webinar section. It will show you my upcoming webinars as well as the others output by the team. Oh, a question has come in. Let me just have a look. Can we get a copy of the slides? They're very interesting and helpful. I'm glad they were interesting and helpful. You certainly can. anyone who send an email to myself, alexg@altus.co.nz. I'll send you a copy of the slides. But also anyone who has attended today will get a recording of this session, which will have all of that in there as well. But yeah, send me an email. I'll happily send you the slides. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all for your time. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next month.